The Antiques Roadshow regrets that it's unable to give valuations by post. And there are 4 Antique Roadshow pocket guides available from bookshops.
Sunday night on BBC One, and at 7, the Lovebirds return.
How's my main married man?
Rather well, as a matter of fact.
Are we talking, woof, honeymoon?
At 7:30, Rodney gets rhythm.
We're styling ourselves when Frankie goes to Hollywood.
Bang on the roof of my van again like that. It won't be Frankie goes to Hollywood, it'll be Rodney goes to hospital.
And at 8, it's the final countdown for Hamish as a wanderer returns to Loch Dhu.
I came all this way. And after all this, when I finally made up my mind, what if something happened to Hamish?
A cliffhanger of a Sunday night on BBC One.
And there's a change to the schedule for the later part of tonight on BBC One to pay tribute to screen legend Ginger Rogers, who died last week. 11:10, Omnibus profiles her famous partner, Fred Astaire. And then at midnight, Fred and Ginger take to the floor in the classic film Top Hat. On BBC One in 25 minutes, the Radio 2 Choir Girl of the Year joins the congregation of Goudhurst in Kent for more songs of praise. The early evening news now on BBC One with Moira Stuart at 6 o'clock.
A weekend war of words follows Labour's decision to rewrite Clause 4. John Major calls Tony Blair a conman. Tony Blair says Mr Major is profoundly silly. The UN's last efforts to salvage the Bosnian ceasefire have failed to make any progress. And Damon Hill wins the San Marino Grand Prix to go to the top of the Drivers' World Championship. Good evening. John Major and Tony Blair have been trading fierce insults today following Labour's decision to rewrite Clause 4 of the party's constitution. In newspaper articles, Mr Major described the debate on Clause 4 as the biggest con since the wolf dressed up as Little Red Riding Hood's granny. He labelled Mr Blair a soundbite politician. Mr Blair replied that the Prime Minister was profoundly silly.
Tony Blair had an early opportunity to rebuff a prime ministerial attack that his advisers had described as a sign of Tory panic. The Labour leader himself was more restrained, but no less dismissive.
It's profoundly silly, and it's quite contrary to what the Conservatives were saying 6 months ago, which was that I would tear my party apart over this. This was a seminal event. It was an event that can change British politics.
The tone of Mr Major's attacks, which include describing yesterday's conference debate as the biggest con since the wolf dressed up as Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother, partly reflect his anger, according to Conservative sources, at Labour's recent party broadcast, in which he was called a liar over taxation. The Conservative chairman joined in the Tory counter-attack following yesterday's conference.
It was a pantomime. It was something set just 5 days before the local government elections, and it seems the media were thoroughly enjoying building it up. But actually, what was said? You say that Tony Blair had a triumph. What he did is he had a PR triumph.
Paddy Ashdown was highly critical of Tory reaction, John Major's in particular.
I think Mr Major's comments yesterday about Tony Blair were personal, insulting, totally unnecessary, will not do him any good, and are an example of just what most people don't like about politics.
Tony Blair is considering the introduction of more internal reforms before the election, involving changes to the National Executive and a reduction of trade union voting power at party conferences. But his opponents argue that the political contest will become more even when the focus is on Labour's policies. That will be put to the test over the next few weeks as Labour flesh out proposals in areas as voter-sensitive as the economy, health and education. Steve Richards, BBC News, Westminster.
The UN Special Envoy to Bosnia, Yasushi Akashi, has said he's made no progress on extending the 4-month ceasefire that's due to expire tomorrow. He was speaking after his meeting with the Bosnian Prime Minister in Sarajevo. Mr Akashi has also been in Pale to hold talks with the Bosnian Serb leadership.
Mr Akashi is intent on using every hour up to the ceasefire deadline to pursue its renewal. His unsquashable pursuit of a continued ceasefire is not matched by those with whom he's been negotiating today. He emerged from his first meeting with the Bosnian government with what he termed a lack of progress report.
I regret that the response we received from Prime Minister Sirajic at this point in time has not been positive.
The Bosnian Prime Minister had merely offered an undertaking not to attack first, then accused the international community of indifference.
The main thing seems to be that it does not spill out. The war does not spill out of Bosnia, seems to be the main concern. Whatever spills in to Bosnia seems to be okay.
Mr. Akashi headed off to see the Bosnian Serbs in Pale, leaving Sarajevo, a city expecting the worst. Streets emptied by snipers, outdoor markets and public gatherings prohibited, hospitals ready for casualties. Underlying all the talk is a pessimism that renewed fighting is inevitable, ceasefire or not. That neither side can probably win a quick and decisive victory is countered by neither side feeling able to concede defeat. Already the losers in one way, 10,000 elderly people from both sides who rely entirely on the Red Cross for their one meal a day. Ironically, international money for this venture ran out today, rather as options for peace are running out. Kate Adey, BBC News, Sarajevo.
Here, around 3,000 opponents of the Criminal Justice Act have been holding a march and rally in London. The organisers say they're determined to keep up the pressure on the government and that today's action is just the beginning of a series of protests against the legislation.
Parliament may have turned the bill into the Criminal Justice Act, but the protests against the government's new laws continue. From Westminster, the demonstrators marched across London in the first event of what the organisers say will be a summer of protest action. Many different organisations have come together in the coalition against the Criminal Justice Act. Different groups have different concerns. They say they've been united by the threat to their civil liberties.
It's an attack on people's democratic rights to protest, to picket, to actually party. And therefore, what we're trying to do is to maximise opposition, because we don't believe the government's got a mandate to pass such a disgusting act.
On Clapham Common, the demonstrators joined local trade unions for a May Day festival. They're calling for a future Labour government to repeal the act. Peter Gould, BBC News, South London.
UN officials in Rwanda say Hutu refugees have been stoned to death after returning to their home village from camps closed by the Tutsi-led government. The UN Special Envoy has criticised the Rwandan army and government for continuing the blockade of Kibeho camp, where at least 2,000 Hutus were killed last weekend.
Those Hutu refugees who've agreed to leave Kibeho camp have their few pathetic belongings searched before they can go, while those who stay in this compound are still being refused food and water by the Rwandan army, a blockade condemned by the UN Secretary-General's Special Envoy here, Aldo Aiello.
I think that is a behavior which we do not accept. We were working out a way together with the government in order to solve this problem. The only thing that I know for sure, that the way that's been adopted during this last weekend is not the right one.
In torrential rain today, more refugees who've been forced to leave Kibeho and other camps were transported back to their villages. On their way, some returning Hutus have been beaten and stoned to death by Tutsis seeking vengeance for last year's genocide. Aid workers here say these people need UN protection.
Well, from what we've seen in the hospitals is they're coming in with quite bad wounds from very bad beatings, from sticks and stones. They've been spat on, they're very shocked. And that's obviously happening from the local population. And from what we can see, there are virtually no UN observers on the road, let alone troops.
The Secretary-General's Special Envoy here indicated today the United Nations may have to look at strengthening its mandate in Rwanda so that refugees are better protected and so that UN troops never again have to stand aside as they did last weekend while women and children are killed in cold blood. Ben Brown, BBC News, Rwanda.
Vietnam is marking the 20th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War, when troops from the communist north overran the capital, Saigon. It's now known as Ho Chi Minh City, where military and civilian leaders have been attending the celebrations.
These are the children of post-war Vietnam, too young to remember the battles which made their country's name synonymous with conflict. But neither they nor the population of what is now called Ho Chi Minh City are being allowed to forget the victory which unified Vietnam under the red flag. It was a carefully choreographed celebration of state power, A reminder that while Marxist economics may have been abandoned, the Communist Party remains the mighty force it was throughout the war years. The Vietnam War claimed the lives of 3 million Vietnamese and devastated the country's economy and infrastructure. 57,000 Americans died in a conflict that left their country with deep psychological scars. The last Americans fled from Saigon from the roof of their embassy as the communists approached. It was a humiliating retreat. However, it is a mark of radically changed times that the embassy is about to be handed back to the Americans, and the man who led the final attack on Saigon is pleading for reconciliation. It is time to have full diplomatic relations, said General Van Den Zung. The war must be put behind us. Tonight, the citizens of what most people still call Saigon came out onto the streets. The city is in the middle of an economic boom, and having largely ignored the military display, people were celebrating in their own way. These celebrations have little to do with politics and everything to do with the economic success story of this city. It seems the citizens are content to allow the Communist Party have the political power as long as they hold the purse strings. 20 years ago tonight, tracer bullets arced across the skies of Saigon. The fireworks which mark the end of this day illuminated a city which has found peace. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Vietnam.
Prince Philip has told religious leaders that rapid population growth is responsible for the world's environmental problems, and they must face up to the consequences. He was speaking at Windsor Castle at a conference on religion and conservation.
The summit has brought together some of the world's most senior religious figures, and its underlying theme is that they're still more marginalised than they deserve to be in the environmental debate. Much of the discussion will be in private, and with strong differences between some of the leaders over issues such as the relationship between birth control policies and the sustainability of the environment, frank talking can be expected. At the formal opening session this afternoon, they heard Prince Philip's views on the challenge of the population explosion.
It's up to you. What we've all got to do is to face up to the consequences. If you, for instance, believe that there should be some population program or family planning program, that's up to you to believe it. I'm not trying to tell you anything of the sort. I'm just telling you this is the situation. We've got 6 billion people. It's trebled in my lifetime. And well, it's up to you to make your own conclusions. Can we continue at this rate?
The conference also reflects a belated greening of religion itself. The Indian pilgrimage centre of Vrindavan, for example, has been seriously affected by pollution, and the surrounding sacred forests are under the threat of extinction. Religious and conservation groups are now working together to stem the environmental degradation there and in linked projects in this country.
Yeah, this is where the bridge is going to be with these arches. Yeah.
This pioneering scheme in Leicester is to be followed by others in Coventry and London. Behind these ceremonial start to the summit, bringing an unaccustomed diversity of religious symbolism to Windsor Castle St George's Chapel, lies an acknowledgement by the leaders that they have a long way to go in managing more effectively the 100th of the Earth's land surface that their faiths own. If they can do so, they hope they'll be listened to. Mike Wooldridge, BBC News.
Now, with news of Damon Hill's second Grand Prix win of the season and the rest of the sport, here's Helen Rollason.
Damon Hill has won the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola in his Williams Renault and now heads the Drivers' Championship with 20 points. His rival Michael Schumacher dramatically spun off the track in the 10th lap. Hill's teammate David Coulthard finished in 4th place.
Amid all the hubbub of the Imola starting grid and with the race only minutes away, a poignant tribute as Damon Hill called his fellow drivers around him to stand in silence and remember the tragic deaths of Ayrton Senna and Roland Ratzenberger on this famous track a year ago. The race they subsequently produced was one to live in the memory too. On a track rapidly drying after morning rain, conditions were clearly going to test drivers and pit crews to the limit, and only 10 laps had passed when Michael Schumacher chose to change tyres. It proved disastrous. Moments later, he lost control, spun off, and hit the trackside wall with sickening force. Thoughts flashed back instantly to Senna's fatal crash, but mercifully, the world champion walked away. Gerhard Berger's brief spell at the front also ended with a pit stop as the Ferrari team experienced unexpected problems, allowing Damon Hill to go clear. The gift was hungrily devoured. The real excitement, though, was going on behind him as his teammate David Coulthard and Jean Alesi jousted thrillingly for second place. But though the Scot held the Frenchman at bay, he incurred the wrath of officials for speeding in the pit lane and had to serve a 10-second penalty, relegating him to 4th place. Hill, meanwhile, cruised home to his 11th Grand Prix victory with an ease which hardly typified the race.
I'm very pleased for everyone at Williams that we can come back here and come away feeling different to last year. But also I'd like to say that I didn't get my wife a birthday present yesterday, and so I think I owe this one to her.
And Hill has given himself a 6-point lead over Schumacher and Alesi in the Drivers' Championship. Kevin Geary, BBC News at the San Marino Grand Prix.
Blackburn Rovers' hopes of winning the FA Carling Premiership have suffered a setback after they were beaten by West Ham. The result means Blackburn remain 8 points clear at the top, but second-place Manchester United have 2 games in hand. West Ham's 2-0 victory boosts their chances of avoiding relegation.
With West Ham needing a win as much as Blackburn, this always promised to be a fierce test of the leaders' championship pretensions. Early on, it seemed they might prevail, and their captain Tim Sherwood produced Blackburn's best chance of a frenzied first half. But after half-time, it was West Ham, still haunted by the prospect of relegation, who took the initiative. Though Tim Flowers acrobatically saved this cross shot from Tim Breaker, West Ham weren't to be denied for long, as the corner which followed was headed in by their Danish defender, Mark Reaper. Blackburn, with the championship so close, were far from their best, but they did have a goal disallowed for a foul when Alan Shearer thought he'd equalised. It didn't matter, though, as West Ham took a giant step towards safety when Don Hutchison scored their second goal with 7 minutes left. The championship race is far from over. Duncan Jones, BBC News.
And in the race to win promotion to the Premiership, the leaders Middlesbrough have virtually clinched the Ensley First Division title. In their last match at Ayresome Park, they beat Luton 2-1. John Henry scored both goals to ensure a winning finish to Borough's 92-year history at the old stadium. At the Hawthorns, Tranmere lost 5-1 to West Brom and lost any chance of automatic promotion. Lee Ashcroft scored a hat-trick. This breakaway goal was his second. Tranmere is still hopeful of a place in the playoffs. Middlesbrough need a point to become champions. Mike Atherton has been reappointed as England's cricket captain, but only for half of the summer. Atherton, who's been told by the chairman of selectors Ray Illingworth not to criticise his fellow selectors in the future, will lead England in the one-day internationals and the first 3 tests against the West Indies. But he doesn't feel he's under pressure.
You seem to be always on trial whenever you play for England, whether you're just as a player or as a captain. There's no difference to what happened at the beginning of last year. I was appointed for the New Zealand half of the series only. So things haven't changed, and that's just the way we do things here in England.
Chairmen of England's 32 professional rugby league clubs are attending a special general meeting in Huddersfield this afternoon amid rumours that the controversial Super League will be expanded to 18 clubs. The meeting was called after 3 weeks of protests against the proposed league, mostly concerning the amalgamation of clubs. Full details are expected to be announced later this week. The defending champion Stephen Hendry is just 2 frames away from winning the Embassy World Snooker Championship in Sheffield. Hendry leads Nigel Bond by 16 frames to 8. Moira.
50 years ago today, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his bunker in Berlin. A few days later, the city fell to Soviet troops and the German army surrendered. Now only a part of the bunker complex remains, and the Berlin authorities are trying to decide what to do with the site.
Russian tanks closing in on Berlin.